Famed gator hunter Troy Landry of the show Swamp People has found himself in a little bit of hot water.
Louisiana wildlife and fishery agents cited him after an undercover sting in St. Mary Parish last month.
For years, Troy Landry was the one man the swamp refused to break. Viewers watched him stare down alligators like it was just another morning routine, the king of the swamp, turning danger into something almost casual. But in 2025, Troy faced a fight he could not grab, shoot, predict, or muscle his way through. It unfolded far from the bayou, where courage usually saves him. Did you ever imagine Troy Landry powerless? Is strength the same thing as control? What did the swamp give him? And what did it quietly take back first? Before the cameras, before the crown. Long before reality TV turned him into a household name, Troy Landry was already living a life most people would never sign up for. He grew up deep in Louisiana's bayou country, where being Cajun was not a brand or an accent you turned on for cameras, but a way of surviving day after day. In that world, the swamp was not a backdrop. It was the job, the school, and sometimes the judge. You learned early that if you wanted to eat, pay bills, or protect your family, you went into the water even when it scared you. Troy's upbringing was built on generations doing the same dangerous work. Hunting alligators was not some extreme sport or wild adventure story. It was a tradition passed down quietly, often without explanation, because explaining fear was seen as a luxury. Pain was normal. Cuts healed, or they did not. Injuries were brushed off with jokes and stubborn silence. When people talk about toughness in the bayou, they are not talking about bravado. They are talking about necessity. Would you choose this life if you knew it meant normalizing danger every single season? By the time audiences met Troy on Swamp People, his identity was already carved out by years of risk that cameras never caught. The show did not create the man. It simply introduced him. That is where the irony starts to quietly creep in. The swamp rewards toughness. It respects skill. It pays those who know how to read water, weather, and animal behavior better than anyone else. But it never promises mercy. The same place that feeds you can turn on you without warning, and there is no apology when it does. There is also something else the cameras rarely show: silence. In swamp culture, you do not complain. You endure. You keep moving. You show up even when your body is sore, injured, or worn down from years of pushing past limits. Is tradition worth inheriting pain if that pain slowly becomes invisible to you? And at what point does survival stop being a badge of honor and start becoming a trap? Before the fame, before the crown, Troy's life was already shaped by endurance without guarantees. He learned to rely on instinct, not comfort, and strength, not safety nets. That mindset built a legend, but it also planted the seeds for something far more fragile. Because if the swamp hardens you for long enough, what happens when your own body starts breaking? When the hunter's body turns against him, the first real warning did not come as fear or doubt. It came as a pain that refused to leave. By 2021, Troy Landry was dealing with what he later described as constant, 24/7 pain in his back. This was not the kind of ache you stretch away or laugh off at the dock. It was the kind that follows you into sleep and greets you before your boots hit the floor. For a man whose life revolved around movement, strength, and balance, his own spine had quietly become the enemy. The guy who wrestled alligators for a living could not escape his own body. How do you even process that when pain has always been part of the job? Troy eventually went through back surgery, and when it worked, the relief felt almost unreal. He talked about going from non-stop pain to feeling none at all, like someone finally turned off a noise he had learned to live with. For most people, that would have been a moment to slow down, to rethink limits. But the swamp does not reward hesitation, and neither did Troy's mindset. He survived, but survival came with a bill he would keep paying. Then came 2022, and with it, a diagnosis that hits differently no matter how tough you are. Prostate cancer. There is no bravado that softens that word. Troy faced surgery again, this time not for mobility, but for his life. What made this moment unsettling was not panic or dramatic speeches. It was how calm he sounded. He spoke plainly, thanked doctors, leaned on faith, and kept moving forward. Does beating cancer mean you are safe? Or does it just remind you how fragile things really are? This is where the story gets uncomfortable in a quiet way. Troy did everything right. He caught it, treated it, and survived. Fans celebrated. Headlines framed it as a victory. And yes, it was. But survival is not a reset button. It does not rewind the wear and tear of decades spent in water, hauling heavy lines and bracing against animals that do not care how famous you are. How do you deal with fear when your job has always been to run toward it instead of away? By the time he returned to Swamp People, Troy was no longer just fighting the swamp. He was managing his body, listening for warning signs that never existed before, and pushing through anyway, because stopping felt worse than continuing. Would you slow down after surgery and cancer, or would you push harder to prove nothing had changed? He survived pain. He survived cancer. On paper, that should have been the end of the story. So why did 2025 break him anyway? The king meets the law. By the time Troy came back from surgery and cancer, there was another kind of pressure quietly building around him. Not physical this time, reputational. In 2024, Troy Landry found himself caught in something the swamp never prepares you for. A paperwork problem. A gator tagging sting in St. Mary Parish that suddenly pulled a local legend into a very modern spotlight. Here is what actually happened, because the internet loves skipping this part. Authorities cited Troy for improper tagging of alligators, which is a regulatory issue tied to how harvested gators are labeled and reported. There was no dramatic chase, no violent confrontation, no secret criminal empire uncovered in the marsh. This was not a fall from grace. It was a clash between tradition and regulation. Still, when your image is built on being the king of the swamp, even a citation feels louder than it should. Can a legend survive paperwork? What did not happen matters just as much. Troy was not arrested. He was not banned from hunting. He did not lose his livelihood overnight. Yet, headlines moved fast, and nuance moved slowly. To the public, rules feel clean and simple. To someone raised in generational swamp culture, they often feel layered, confusing, and deeply bureaucratic. The irony here is almost too perfect. A man who mastered reading water, weather, and animal behavior found himself navigating forms, tags, and compliance. Is breaking a regulation the same thing as losing honor? This moment mattered because it stacked on top of everything else. Pain, surgery, cancer, recovery, and now scrutiny. Even though the situation was addressed and handled, it introduced stress that does not show up on camera. Stress that follows you home. Stress that sits in your chest when you are supposed to be resting. How many hits can someone take before the weight starts adding up? On Swamp People, Troy had always been portrayed as steady and unshakable. But behind the scenes, this was another reminder that toughness does not shield you from rules, systems, or public judgment. It just means you carry the load quietly. Why did this moment matter so much? Because it chipped away at the illusion that survival only happens in the swamp. And yet, even this was not the thing that truly shook him, because while the cameras focused on tags and headlines, something far more personal was waiting back home. So the question becomes impossible to ignore. If the swamp and the law could not break him, what was waiting where he felt safest? Baby Crew. The tragedy wasn't about Troy at all. It wasn't his back surgery, his cancer battle, or the legal noise that followed. Those were storms he could stand in. What came next was something no knife, no instinct, and no lifetime of swamp toughness could prepare him for. It started with a baby, his grandson, Crew. Crew was born with biliary atresia, a rare and aggressive liver disease that blocks the bile ducts and slowly poisons the body from the inside. Most families never even hear the term until a doctor sits them down and explains why a newborn's eyes look yellow, or why his tiny stomach is swelling. The kind of conversation that makes the world feel smaller. The kind that steals your breath before the words even finish landing. And in Crew's case, it kept getting worse. What do you do when strength is useless and the problem is too small to wrestle? As the months passed, Crew's condition slid toward end-stage liver failure. His family watched him lose weight when he should have been gaining it, watched his skin change color, and watched energy fade from a child who should have been discovering the world one soft giggle at a time. Every test, every scan, every update from the doctors carried the same quiet shadow. If he didn't get a liver transplant soon, he wouldn't make it. That is the moment when even the strongest people feel themselves cracked. How do you hunt hope instead of alligators when the stakes look like this? The transplant list is a strange kind of waiting room. Equal parts fear, math, and prayer. You wait for a match. You wait for the timing. You wait for a miracle. And the hardest part is knowing there is nothing you can do to speed it up. No trap to set, no tag to fix, no fight to win. Troy could shoot a gator across the water while standing in a rocking boat, but he could not trade places with his grandson. All he could do was show up at the hospital, hold the tiny hand that barely wrapped around one of his fingers, and ask the world to pray for Crew. Is this the hardest kind of courage? The kind that forces you to stop fighting? When Troy posted updates for fans, the tone was stripped of television drama. There was no big speech, no attempt to sound strong for the cameras. It was a grandfather asking for help in the only way he could, hoping people who had watched him for years would lend their strength to a child who had barely taken his first breaths. His words were simple, because emotions this heavy don't need decoration. They just need honesty. And that honesty is what hit people hardest. Viewers who had seen Troy lift gators with his bare hands suddenly saw him powerless, sitting beside a hospital bed, waiting for a phone call that might save a life. If you ever wondered what heartbreak looks like for a man like him, it's in the stillness, the waiting, the way he kept showing up even when every update felt like flipping a coin. Throughout all of this, the swamp kept moving. Seasons turned. Hunters are prepared for new challenges. Cameras rolled. But Troy's world was paused around one truth. Crew needed a liver, soon. And the fact that everything depended on timing and biology instead of skill made it more painful than anything he had ever faced on water. This was the tragedy people didn't see on screen. Not the injuries, not the headlines, not the public noise. It was a child's life hanging in the balance, while a family waited for a miracle that could arrive today, next week, or too late. And while Troy waited and prayed, another shadow was already forming in the background. Because while he held on to hope for Crew, the swamp gave up its dead. The swamp that remembers. The timing was unsettling, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just real in a way that sits heavy in your chest. While Troy was living in a cycle of hospital updates, prayers, and waiting rooms, the swamp offered up something unexpected. During filming connected to Swamp Mysteries in April 2025, Troy Landry and his team uncovered human remains buried deep in the marsh. Not recent, not criminal, old. The kind of discovery that turns land into a history book. As they dug further, it became clear these were not isolated bones. They were part of forgotten burial grounds, lost cemeteries swallowed by time, water, and shifting earth. Families once laid to rest are now resurfacing decades or even centuries later as the swamp slowly rearranges itself. This was not a ghost story or a warning sign. It was geography doing what it always does, revealing what it has held on to. Still, you could feel the weight of it. Is coincidence ever just coincidence when moments line up like this? What made this discovery hit harder was Troy's tone. He was not excited. He was not performing for television. He was quiet, reflective, and almost cautious with his words. The same man who laughs through danger suddenly spoke with a kind of respect usually reserved for churches and funerals. He talked about how the swamp keeps memories, how it gives and takes on its own timeline. What does the land remember that we forget when we move too fast through it? Symbolically, the moment felt impossible to ignore. While a child fought for life in a hospital bed, the swamp gave up evidence of lives long finished. One story about beginnings hanging by a thread, another about endings refusing to stay buried. The contrast was sharp, but never forced. Troy did not point it out. He did not have to. It sat there quietly, doing the work on its own. Why does this moment feel heavier than anything else we have seen so far? This is the part most coverage skipped. Headlines focused on drama, health scares, or legal noise. Very few stopped to notice how this moment landed emotionally. For someone already stretched thin by fear and hope, discovering human remains is not just another day at work. It becomes a reminder of time, of fragility, of how little control anyone really has. Especially someone who built his entire life around control. The swamp has always been painted as wild and dangerous, but here it was patient. It waited until Troy was already vulnerable to return its past. Not as a threat, not as a message, just as a fact. Death exists. Life is fragile, and none of it asks for permission. So when you step back and look at the pain, the survival, the waiting, and the memories rising from the mud, one question starts pressing harder than the rest. What story ties all of this together? The tragedy no one talks about. By now, it should be clear that the real tragedy here is not one single event. It is not a diagnosis, a headline, or a moment caught on camera. It is an inheritance, the quiet kind. The kind no one announces, but everyone lives with. For Troy Landry, the swamp did not just hand down skills and pride. It passed along risk, loss, and a lifetime of exposure that adds up slowly. Long before Troy faced cancer or watched his grandson fight for a liver, he had already learned what loss feels like. His brother had passed away years earlier, another reminder that life in and around the swamp is never gentle. Death was not a stranger. It was part of the background noise. You mourn, you bury, and then you go back to work, because stopping does not bring anyone back. What do we pass down without realizing it when survival becomes routine? Troy's cancer was not caused by the swamp, and neither was Crew's illness. That matters. This is not about blame or superstition. It is about cost. Generations who work hard, push limits, and accept danger often inherit more than toughness. They inherit stress, wear on the body, and have a mindset that teaches you to ignore warning signs until they get loud. Is toughness something you are born with, or something you learn too late to put down? Crew's fight brought all of this into focus. A child who never chose this life, never stepped into the water, and never signed up for risk, yet still found himself facing the consequences of fragile biology. Watching that happen forces a question no gator hunt ever demanded. Can love outlast risk when risk keeps showing up uninvited? On Swamp People, Troy is still the man people expect him to be. Calm, capable, steady. But behind that image is someone carrying layers of history that do not disappear when the cameras turn off. Brother lost, body tested, cancer survived, grandson fighting to live. None of it is dramatic on its own, all of it is heavy together. This is the tragedy no one talks about, because it does not fit cleanly into a headline. It is the slow realization that strength does not cancel consequences. It just helps you carry them longer. The swamp gives identity, purpose, and pride. But it also asks for payment, often spread across generations, so no one notices the full cost until it is already paid. So, where does that leave Troy Landry now? So Troy Landry never really lost his crown. If anything, he finally learned what it weighs. Years of wrestling alligators taught him physical strength, but the last few years demanded something harder. Waiting, hoping, loving, when there is nothing left to fix. Watching a grandson fight for life while the world keeps moving anyway. That is a different kind of endurance. Maybe the swamp was never teaching domination at all. Maybe it was teaching patience. Do you think strength is physical or emotional? Would you have survived what Troy Landry faced? Drop your comments below.